Today we're going to be talking about communication and behavior changes in dementia. And this is a topic that I could really present on for many hours. It's a very complex topic. We will be sharing some resources with you that you can look up afterwards if you want some more detailed information. And there's also a longer education session that's on our YouTube that you can look at as well. So once again, please feel free to ask me any questions you want throughout using the chat pod, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question that way as well. So today we're going to look at a person-centered approach to talking about behavioral and psychological symptoms. We'll look at how communication changes, talk about some specific responsive behaviors. And then I really want to focus most of the presentation around different techniques for communication and approach, non-pharmacological approaches to behavioral and psychological symptoms, and relational and physical approaches as well. Just for a quick review, today, when we're talking about dementia, we're talking about all types of dementia. Now, there will be different symptoms that appear depending on the type of dementia and, of course, on the individual. We know that Alzheimer's is the most common form, but often we see a mixed presentation with other types of pathology, like vascular in particular, is quite common as well. And again, the symptoms that are present in each of these diseases will appear at different times and in different ways. So when we talk about behavioral and psychological symptoms, not all of them will appear for a particular individual, and they will manifest differently. So some things to think about as well when we talk about dementia. It's important to note that dementia itself is not a mental illness. It's caused by an underlying pathology in the brain that causes the brain to deteriorate over time. And as the brain deteriorates, the person's ability to function changes, and you can also have changes, of course, in communication and behaviors that are exhibited due to that deterioration. And because dementia affects everyone differently, how those changes manifest will be very variable, and we'll talk about some of the things that kind of contribute to that. The symptoms of dementia also will change over time, and for some people, they will fluctuate day to day. So you'll have what people sometimes call good days and bad days, or some people will have increased capacity on certain days compared to others. But over time, any person with a diagnosis of dementia is going to require more help to ensure that their needs are met. And typically, that help is being provided for most of the disease progression by a family caregiver, most often a spouse or an adult child. And again, progressively, that person will kind of be taking on more and more responsibility to ensure good communication and to help the person to kind of live well and function as well as possible with dementia. Some of our guiding principles today is that at the Alzheimer's Society, we really believe in the importance of a person-centered approach when we're understanding communication and behavior changes. And so some of our principles around that is that we believe communication is possible at any and all stages of the disease. And that communication can change from being verbal to being nonverbal, but there's still a connection and a relation and exchange taking place. So that's really important to remember, to focus on what communication is available and really focus on the positive. Also, that the focus should be on the remaining skills and abilities of the person living with dementia. And that will change, but it really changes the situation and the context when we're focusing on what remains instead of what is lost. Again, we always want to approach these things with a kindness, compassion, reassurance, and positivity, because those things will have an impact on any attempt to support someone who's going through communication or behavior change. The other principle is that it's really important for us to realize that as a person who's relating to a person with dementia, that we need to meet them where they are and accept their reality. It becomes about building a bridge and kind of joining them and validating where they are and being curious enough to get to know about their experience. Also, another principle is that we believe all expressions have a meaning, more than just the expression itself. So there's always something underneath or behind words, gestures, and actions and behaviors. And it's important when we're trying to understand these behaviors, or whether it's a gesture or communication, or if it's words that they're using, even if they might not make sense at first blush, that we want to connect with the person behind in order to understand. And always remembering that the person is still there. And that's a message that comes to us very strongly from persons living with the disease, is that the people who are relating to the person need to remember that I'm still here, is what they say. We're just going to put up a poll that just to understand a little bit more about your experience with communication and behavior change. All right. So the question is, if you provide care or support to someone living with dementia, how often are you experiencing communication issues or communication issues? Actually, is the first question. There's another one. Yeah, the second question is there if you scroll down. So the first one is, how often are you experiencing communication issues? And the second question is, how often are you experiencing distress or difficulties with a behavior that the person living with dementia is expressing?
We'll just leave it up for a minute for people to answer.
And just so you know, your participation in these polls is anonymous. We can see what the answers are, but not who posted them. And we'll get Shayla to also share the results.
Okay, so let's see, 100% voted you experience communication issues daily. And how often do you experience distress and difficulties with behaviors? A few times a week was also 100%.
Yeah, so those are pretty high rates. We know that for us, some of the most complex calls we get and the frequent calls that we get at the Alzheimer's Society are often about trying to understand these changes in communication and behavior and strategies, to help the person to experience more well-being and more peace. So today we're going to look at sorry, my slides weren't moving. Thanks. Okay. Today, we're going to look at some of these changes. And then again, I want to focus mostly on solutions and approach that can help when a person is having difficulty communicating or with a particular behavior. So what you will see for communication changes, and again, these may happen early, more towards the moderate stage, or sometimes later, and not all of them need to be present, but these are some of the ones that we know people have trouble with. You'll see changes in their ability to find the words they're trying to express, in reading or writing, accessing specific memories, especially short-term, attention span. So paying attention for long periods of time can be very stressful. Putting words and ideas into writing, like I said earlier, using their judgment. So being able to assess and judge a specific situation or in order to make a decision. They can have difficulties following social conversations, in particular if there's a lot of people around. Group dynamics can get stressful for a person living with the disease. They may also kind of lose a sense of a social convention, and they may in conversations interrupt or ignore or not respond to someone. They can have difficulty organizing information and thought processes. So what they're saying can appear incoherent in a sense, but it might just be like an ordering issue of information, which is where we kind of have to dig a little deeper to look at the meaning behind what they're saying. Sometimes there can be difficulty in actually producing speech as well, and in understanding what is being said. So keeping track of a topic. And you'll notice that the person might have trouble, for instance, watching TV or movies later on that have kind of a complex plot line, because it's hard for them to keep track of the topic, especially if it moves back and forth from one scene area to another scene area, or moving back and forth in time. So there's a link here that we wanted to point to between communication issues and behaviors that are expressed. And this question just asks about, how do you feel when you're not being understood by the person in front of you, or when you're having a hard time communicating? We know that people say they often feel angry, frustrated, sad, isolated, alienated, fearful, lonely, and depressed. And for the person living with dementia, even if they can't express that this is how they are feeling, this is often happening in the background when communication issues are present. And these kinds of emotions can lead to different types of responsive behaviors, whether it's being more agitated, whether it's being aggressive or frustrated, or wanting to leave a situation. So sometimes, like, you might think that the individual is wandering and having that type of behavior, or exit seeking, but really they're just trying to get away from a situation that's making them feel uncomfortable. So some of the things with communication that we say are not to do, because they tend to just increase and be a trigger for a person, that can either promote behaviors that you might find difficult, or that can cause the person to withdraw from connection and interaction, and really isn't honoring the dignity of the individual. Number one is always, don't argue. It's better to kind of join the reality and get curious about the reality that they're expressing, even if you feel like they're wrong, even if they might be wrong. Arguing, it doesn't actually work to correct anything in their mind, because the brain loses the capacity to do that for a rational reasoning process. Don't order the person around is another one. Again, they're still very emotionally present. They can feel condescension, and they can experience that even if they can't reflect it back to you. Don't set up expectations that can't be met. So always try in your interactions to have them be failure-free. And that means that you need to know kind of where the person is at and what they're capable of, so that you know how to guide the conversation or how to ask them to perform a specific task. Don't ask open-ended questions, especially about current events or recent events. So something like, what do you want for lunch, is less good than, would you like a sandwich or noodles for lunch? Giving them a choice. You can ask open-ended questions about the past. In fact, that's part of reminiscence. You might ask them, can you tell me, if they remember these things, especially, can you tell me what you liked best about working for the military? Or can you tell me your favorite memory from your wedding? Or, something like that about the past. It's okay to be more open-ended. Again, some of these are common sense, so don't be condescending. Don't talk about the person in front of them without including them. Don't remind them that they have forgotten. It's really easy to say things like, don't you remember? We did that yesterday, or I already told you earlier. But those kinds of things just trigger and point out their disability, the fact that they are not able to do that. The other one that is extremely hard, in particular for family members, is not to take it personally. They can't help what they are doing, and they don't mean it personally. And so if we can create a little bit of distance between us and something that's triggering, it tends to help the whole situation resolve more quickly. And the last thing is, don't quiz them. So asking a flurry of different questions and things will only create confusion, and also can create reaction. So steps for good communication is to set the stage. And some of that means to make sure that the environment is good for communicating, that there's not a lot of distractions, that the person is comfortable. Make sure that they have your attention. So if they're looking out the window and you're talking to them, they might not be fully hearing what you're saying. So make sure that you're looking at them, make that eye contact, get down to their level. If they're sitting down, it helps. And make sure that you're speaking very slowly and clearly and at a good volume, using simple, short, and familiar words and sentences. So no long speeches, kind of keep it brief and allow some time for response. Giving one message at a time. Pay attention and listen is really important. Listen to what's being said. Also watching their nonverbals when they're talking, and allow time for their response. Sometimes it takes them just a little bit longer to produce the sentence or the thought that they want to share. And if it's really difficult, just let it go and try again later. This graphic talks about show, tell, touch, see, understand, and feel, which means you can start to integrate verbal cues and visual cues into what you're saying. If you're asking them if they'd like a coffee, for instance, you could hold up a coffee cup and show them. If you want them to put their jacket on, you can kind of hold the jacket up and like show them the arm to put it on. This is more towards obviously the more moderate to later stage, but it's important to know that you might have to bridge to that level. Again, be very directed, so concrete and specific, and try not to argue or correct. You can acknowledge what someone is saying without needing to agree is also another important point. People sometimes have trouble when they're like, but that's not true. What they're saying is not true. But in a sense, it doesn't matter if it isn't true. There comes a point in time where you're not going to be able to reorient them to what the truth is. And it's better to just understand the world they're living in, why they might think it's true, and decide if it matters, if what they're saying is truthful or if it's not true. And who does it matter to? Does it matter to you? Does it matter to them? And why? These are some things to kind of think about. Just going to check time. Okay, so based on where I am in my slides, I'll probably be an additional 5 to 10 minutes after we're done at 12:30. So apologies for that. Like I said, it's a very lengthy kind of topic. Now, the connection between communication and behavior we talked about earlier, but it's not these behaviors can emerge and they're not necessarily a result of communication issues. There can be other reasons why they're emerging, but certainly having good communication minimizes the emergence of some of these behaviors. The ones that are on the screen it's not a complete list, but these are some of the ones that people find that are really troubling to them. And they're ones that can impact the safety of the person living with dementia. So they're ones you kind of want to start to figure out and minimize. And that includes resisting, that could be resisting care, resisting eating, restlessness, which has an underlying anxiety to it, wandering or exit seeking, repeated actions and questions. Again, that can have an underlying anxiety component, accusations, suspiciousness, and paranoia, sexual expression, anxiety and fear, anger, hallucinations, and aggression. Now, it's important, I wanted to talk a little bit about person-centered language, because we commonly use language like acting out, aggressive behavior, the person was agitated, they're being difficult. But if you're looking at it that way, you're suggesting that the behavior is a result of the problem with the person, instead of focusing on the problem behind that's creating the symptoms that are manifesting as behavior. And so a more person-centered approach is really to describe the behavior itself, like the specific behavior that's happening. So instead of the individual as being aggressive, it's the person strikes out when asked to undress. So there's a specific context in which these behaviors are occurring, and that context is important. And we're going to look at that more in depth. But when we look at a person-centered approach, we really need to look at the behavior as something that is an expression. Sorry, I wanted to get to this next slide. So when the emphasis is on the person, behavior is not seen as a problem, but actions and expressions that need to be understood. The behavior is a response or a reaction to something, and the goal is to understand the behavior being presented. And so this is all about behavior as communication, could be of an underlying need or a discomfort, or behavior as a reaction, which again is a response to, it could be the environment. There's a number of things, and we'll look at that in just a moment. According to a couple of studies that I looked at, between 80 and 97% of persons living with dementia will experience a behavioral or psychological symptom. And we get asked a lot about pharmacological management of behavioral and psychological symptoms, but the kind of leading practice opinion is that using pharmacological management should only be secondary because they pose a risk of medication side effects, and antipsychotics, which are sometimes used for the more severe behavioral and psychological side effects, are associated with a higher risk of myocardial infarction, stroke, as well as mortality. There's also limited evidence of benefit of using these medications. And again, when a particular behavior is posing a safety risk to the person living with dementia or to another person, like someone who's caring for them, sometimes these medications are helpful and can also increase the quality of life by introducing more peace and calmness, but it should be considered very carefully. And what we recommend first and always is a non-pharmacological approach to understanding these underlying behaviors. There are a lot of different therapies and specific techniques that are considered non-pharmacological approaches for behavioral and psychological symptoms. And I have put a link in here for one evidence-based review that I found where it has the full article online that you can look at, but there is a lot of research out there that you can read. This particular review looks at aromatherapy, massage, multisensory stimulation, bright light therapy, as well as psychosocial approaches like validation therapy, music therapy, reminiscence therapy, pet therapy, and meaningful activities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these soon. What I'd like to give you here is a technique that family caregivers can use at home. Healthcare providers can use this as well, and it's called the ABCs of behavior. This involves identifying the antecedents. So what happened before the behavior? What was the specific behavior itself? And what were the consequences? So what happens immediately after a specific behavior occurs? When we're looking at the antecedents, it's useful to use this approach. It's called the pieces approach, and become a bit of an investigator. So when you're talking about the physical, you want to assess the person's physical condition. Sometimes specific behavior can manifest as a result of delirium, as a result of another disease that they are experiencing, medications that they're on. Often a behavior like irritability, even aggression or agitation is because of pain, and the person has lost the ability to share the pain that they're in or to talk about it. And so sometimes we don't even realize that they're in pain. Other disabilities, infection, and dehydration can also contribute to behavioral and psychological symptoms. When we're thinking about intellectual and we're looking at what happened right before, were they asked to do something that was beyond their current cognitive capacity, or were they having difficulty communicating something? Emotional is, have they been isolated, alone, or understimulated? So a person living with dementia needs to be engaged in life, in meaningful activities. They need a certain amount of stimulation. And again, the sort of other side of that is, were they overstimulated? Was there too much noise? That's kind of an environment, but maybe, are they tired? Have they been doing too much in that day? And then looking at, were they feeling happy, sad, guilty, anxiety, depression, jealousy? All of these emotions are still present for a person living with dementia. And so doing that assessment on what was happening before the behavior can point to why it happened. And then there's also capabilities. Do they understand and have the ability to complete the particular task they were doing in the moment? Or was it too complicated? Did they feel like they were failing? Did they get frustrated and perhaps get angry? The environment, again, is there too much noise? Is it crowded? Is the lighting poor, or is there overstimulating lighting? And those kinds of things can increase agitation. And lastly, social relationships. You need to understand that the person living with this disease comes from a particular context of their personality, their history, and how those elements contribute to the present. Their religious, cultural, and political beliefs, and also their relationship with you. So it's good when you're looking at fulfilling that A part of the behavior analysis, the antecedents, to look at all these different things and write down what might be contributing to this behavior happening. When you're describing the behavior, once again, be very specific. So as an example, agitation, John or Jane appears very agitated in the morning. Usually it appears after getting out of bed, and it gets worse through the morning. Requests for them to get up and move around or loud noises seem to make it worse. In that case, I might look at, what's happening in the morning. Are they in pain? Have they had their pain medication if they take it? Do things get better or worse? Are they hungry? Are there other things, other types of discomfort? Maybe they like quiet time in the morning and they always did. They just want to have a coffee and read the paper like they always did through life. So again, when you start to look at the details of the behavior, it can point to why it might be happening. Same thing with aggression. The person often strikes out when I try to help them with personal cares or with dressing. It doesn't happen every time, but with dressing, it happens more frequently. So look at the whole context of the dressing. Why might this be an issue? Are you asking the person to raise their arms? Maybe they have shoulder pain. Have they always had discomfort or modesty around their body? Again, you need to figure out kind of what's going on for that specific person. When we're talking about the C, so consequences, write down and look at what happens after the behavior has occurred and how can that inform why it might have happened. How do the consequences of a particular behavior reinforce it occurring again or discourage it? And this includes consequences that we put in place or a natural consequence of the environment. In terms of behavioral support techniques, first you want to try to meet the need that is being expressed through the behavior or address any modifiable triggers in the environment or with the person. Like I said, pain is a big one. Learn new techniques to try and understand that what works now might evolve over time and you might need to find something new the next time. But the most important thing is to connect, not correct. So connect with the person to really find out why these behaviors are happening and try not to come to correct or argue with them. Here are some specific behavioral support therapies that are mentioned across the literature that you can learn a bit more about. There's validation therapy, which involves joining them in to understand their world. And that will help you kind of create that connection and also will give you insight into why they might be having a particular issue with communication or behavior. Redirection involves a process of both validating their experience, joining them in their reality to understand it. If it's something that is a painful reality, you might distract them from that reality and redirect them towards something that's more positive, a more positive experience for them. Reminiscence therapy is, again, focusing on reliving past experiences that are positive. You can engage art therapy to allow for expression and creativity. Music therapy. Persons living with dementia have maintained a really good sense of rhythm. So playing instruments, singing, drumming, or listening to music, and specifically music that is important and meaningful to that person. So knowing what their preferences are is important there. Activity therapies include things like dance, sports, drama. It really is helpful for a person living with dementia to be engaged in exercise on a daily basis. Even if it's as simple as walking, it can reduce the amount of behaviors that present. There's also some limited evidence for the complementary therapies like massage. There's quite a bit of evidence for aromatherapy. And again, as humans, we do, most of us enjoy touch, a nurturing touch, whether it's a hand massage or laying a hand on the arm or doing a shoulder massage. And aromatherapy has also been, there's some good research about its impact on behavior and creating a sense of calm with the person. In particular, lavender is one of the oils that's often used. Multisensory therapy is something that has been explored as well, and that involves, you can set up a room that has specific activities and lights and textures, shapes, and things that the person can interact and engage with. Something we have at the society that we're actually giving out are these wonderful activity blankets that go on the individual's lap when they're sitting down, that has all kinds of little, they're like a quilt that has little games and I guess activities that they can do. It's really helpful if the person kind of has an underlying anxiety or restlessness. It gives them something to focus on, and it's also something physical. Pet therapy works really well for a lot of folks with dementia as well, in particular with companion animals. So if you can have a pet brought around or take them to visit animals, that can be very helpful. And then, of course, continuing to engage the person in meaningful activities like games, gardening, hobbies, or even chores at home. It allows them to continue to contribute, to be engaged, and the skill that they're participating in is also, it's really good for the brain. It's good for brain health. Now, as I said at the beginning, behavior can be very complex, and there might be times when you need help. So please feel free to give us a call if you need help understanding more about a specific behavior or communication issue, because they do manifest differently with everyone. And sometimes it takes a little work to really drill down into why these issues are happening. So we can help talk you through that. In particular, please reach out if you feel like you're burnt out or you have compassion fatigue. You find yourself becoming a little bit more numb or having a lack of feeling, which can happen to somebody who's providing a lot of care. We can help support you in that. And again, try to focus on prevention, setting a good environment, and setting up for good experiences. So what I meant to say there is that sometimes it's not about going straight at the behavior that's happening. It's about changing some of the other environment, and then that behavior itself will resolve over time as the person's well-being increases, their sense of calm and peace. The next few slides are just looking at, okay, how do we set the stage for good to create a really positive environment for the person living with dementia? First of all, use what you know about the person. When you are communicating or interacting, it's important that you know their preferences, their likes, their dislikes, things that they might react to, things that they might be interested in, and kind of focus on those positive elements of who they are in their lives. Reduce distractions as much as possible. That includes no TVs on in the background, no radio, taking them into a quiet room or a quiet space if you need to talk, and always chatting face to face. So make sure you have that eye contact. Be flexible. So be prepared that things might not always go as planned. Remember that you have to work to their level, and be flexible about what their capabilities are on any given day, and stay positive as much as possible. Just bring in good feelings, good, even humor, use humor. It can really dispel situations. When you're connecting as well, it's important to think about the body. So with a person living with dementia, if you watch some of our other education, you know that there's vision changes over time. So the person ends up losing some of that peripheral vision. So to avoid creating a trigger, always try to approach the person from the front, get to eye level. You can connect physically, and it can be very soothing, whether it's to hold a hand or put your, and go under the hand is really the good technique, so that they can pull away if they want to. Be mindful of your body language, and if it's expressing any frustration, any anger or impatience, kind of modify it, relax your body. And then also pay attention to their nonverbals. What are they saying with their body? Are they comfortable? Are they feeling safe? Are they in pain? Do they want connection? Do they need a little bit more space? These are some things that it's important to be mindful about. And then also your voice and the language that you use. Providing information simply, breaking down tasks, and ensuring that your tone is calm, it's positive, it's relaxed. That has a huge impact. Empathic listening means listening to what's being said underneath. So even if they're communicating with words, you need to hear what's happening behind the message. And then also being self-reflective about how your beliefs, your behavior, your experiences are contributing in that relationship to something positive, or that might be creating more stress or more discord between you and the person as well. And kind of trying to address those things, being really honest with yourself about that. We're going to switch into some time. I know that was a lot of information, and I'd like to switch into some time for questions. If you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat pod, or you can ask them out loud right now. This slide has some of our programs and services. We'll be happy to discuss any of these with you at any time if you feel like it could be supportive of you. And just so you know, we've really enjoyed doing these lunchtime learning series. We're going to take a little break for summer and return in September. The series will continue to address special topics in dementia. And we'll be also reaching out to some of our partners across health and community to have guest presenters come in. So please join us again in September. There will be some ongoing dementia care training for healthcare providers in Montague, in Charlottetown, as well as in Western PEI. And Shelley's contact information is there if that's something that you're interested in. At the end here, I have a little slide about some resources and acknowledgements, and we will post these links as well on the YouTube page. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sorry we're a little bit over time, but happy to stay on with you if you do have more questions.